If your phlox is starting to look tired right now, ragged blooms up top, that white dusty film creeping up the lower leaves, I need you to stop scrolling for the next few minutes, because you are about to lose the rest of your blooming season and not even know why. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly what I do in August to keep my phlox blooming, full and bright, right up until the first hard frost, while everyone else's garden has already gone quiet. Before we get into it, hit the subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this stuff travels. Alright, let's get into why your phlox even stops blooming in the first place, because once you understand this, everything else in this video is going to click. Here's the thing nobody explains clearly enough. That big, showy flower cluster at the top of your phlox, the one you probably planted it for in the first place, is basically a greedy little tenant. It pulls in almost all of the plant's energy for itself, and once those flowers get pollinated and start turning into seed, the plant considers its job done. It stops sending energy to make new buds anywhere else, because as far as the plant is concerned, it already succeeded. I used to just let that happen. I'd watch the top bloom fade, get a little brown and crispy, and I'd think, well, that's just the plant winding down for the year, nothing I can do about that. I left it alone because it felt like the polite thing to do, right? Just let it finish naturally. Except that's exactly the mistake that shortens your blooming season by weeks, sometimes more. Here's what's actually happening underneath. All along the stem, tucked into the little joints where the leaves meet the main stalk, there are buds just sitting there, dormant, waiting. They're not doing anything because the top bloom is hogging all the plant's attention. But the second you remove that top bloom, the whole picture changes. The plant redirects its energy sideways into those sleeping buds, and they wake up. This one habit, understanding this one thing, is the difference between a phlox that quits in August and one that's still going strong in October. So let's talk about actually doing this, because I promise you, there is a wrong way, and I did it for years. My first instinct, and maybe yours too, is to grab the pruners and just take the whole stem down, almost to the ground, because it looks tidy that way. Or honestly, sometimes I'd just snap it off with my hands because it was faster. Both of those are mistakes, and here's why. What you actually want to do is cut just the spent flower cluster itself, about 4 to 6 inches down the stem, right above the first healthy set of leaves or a side bud. That's it. You're not taking the whole stem, you're just removing the part that's already done its job. Do this every 3 to 5 days through August. I know that sounds like a lot, but it genuinely takes a couple of minutes per plant once you get into the habit, and the payoff is worth it. One thing I want to flag here, because I get asked this constantly. If you've got creeping phlox, the low, spreading kind that carpets the ground in spring, this whole deadheading routine doesn't really apply the same way. Creeping phlox blooms in spring and it's already setting up next year's buds by late summer, so instead of deadheading it now, you just want to give it a light trim after it finishes flowering to keep it dense and tidy. 2 different plants, 2 different jobs. Don't mix them up. But for your upright garden phlox, the tall stuff with the big rounded flower heads, deadheading every few days is your single biggest lever for extending bloom time. Within about a week of starting this, you'll start noticing new little shoots pushing out along the stem, and before long, instead of one bald, spent stalk, you've got 3 or 4 fresh flower clusters coming in. The whole plant fills back out. Okay, so you're deadheading. The plant is trying to push out new growth. But here's where I made my next big mistake years ago, and it's such a common one. I figured, alright, the plant is working hard, let's feed it well. So I gave it a rich, nitrogen-heavy fertilizer, the kind that makes everything grow lush and green fast. And it worked, sort of. My phlox got tall, leafy, thick-stemmed, looked great for about 2 weeks. Except the flowers barely showed up, and worse, all that soft new growth hadn't toughened up by the time the first cold snap hit. It got hit hard, some of it just died back. Here's the mechanism, and it's actually pretty simple once you hear it. Nitrogen in August pushes soft, tender, leafy growth. That growth needs time to harden off, to toughen up before frost arrives. If you're feeding heavy nitrogen late in the season, you're basically setting the plant up to get injured by the first cold night. So in August, I stopped the nitrogen completely. Instead, right after I deadhead, I give my phlox something low in nitrogen but higher in phosphorus and potassium. That combination supports new bud development and builds stronger roots, instead of forcing more leafy growth the plant doesn't need right now. If you'd rather keep things natural, wood ash is a solid alternative. It's got a good amount of potassium and phosphorus in it, along with some trace minerals, and a lot of gardeners swear by it for exactly this kind of late-season feeding. Do this once right after your first big deadheading push, and you'll notice the difference. Stronger stems, richer color in the blooms, and a plant that's actually prepared for the season changing, instead of caught completely off guard. Alright, quick pause here. If this is useful so far, and I hope it is, this is exactly the kind of thing I cover every week on this channel, so go ahead and hit subscribe. I've genuinely spent years figuring this stuff out through trial and error, so hopefully I can save you some of that trouble. Let's talk about watering, because I promise you, most people are doing this wrong too, and I absolutely used to be one of them. My old habit was watering in the evening, after the heat of the day had passed, with the hose just running right over the top of the plant. Felt satisfying, honestly, watching all those leaves get a good soak. Here's the problem. Phlox has a pretty shallow root system. It sits close to the surface. And if you're wetting the leaves in the evening, that moisture just sits there overnight. No sun, no wind to dry it off. And that damp film on the leaves is basically an open invitation for fungal problems to move in. So now I water only at the base, first thing in the morning, and I make sure it's a deep soak, not a quick splash. You're aiming for roughly 1 inch of water a week, delivered right to the root zone. And pair that with mulch. A few inches of mulch spread around the base does two things at once. It keeps the soil from drying out too fast in the heat. And it stops that constant swing between soaked and bone dry that stresses the roots out. I use compost or shredded bark, whatever I've got on hand, and it makes a noticeable difference in how steady the plant looks through August. Now let's talk about the thing that scares most gardeners the moment they see it. That white, dusty coating on the lower leaves. I used to look at that and think, well, it's just on the leaves, it's not touching the flowers, so it's probably fine. That is not true, and I learned that the hard way. That white film is a fungus, and it spreads fast, especially with the pattern we get in late summer, warm days followed by cool, damp nights. Once it takes hold, it starts pulling energy away from the leaves, and leaves that are struggling can't properly support the blooms much longer. What starts as a cosmetic issue on a few bottom leaves can climb the whole plant if you ignore it. So here's what actually works. There are two options I rely on. The first is a potassium bicarbonate spray. It's gentler long-term than plain baking soda, because baking soda has sodium in it, and that sodium builds up in the soil over repeated use. Potassium, on the other hand, is actually a nutrient your plant can use, so you're not creating a new problem while solving this one. The second option, and this one surprises people, is a diluted milk spray, applied in direct sunlight. There's a reaction that happens between the proteins in the milk and UV light that actually helps knock back the fungus. It has to be applied in sunlight for that reaction to happen, so timing matters here. And here's a trick that made a real difference for me. Don't just treat the plant itself. Spray the soil underneath and the base of the stems too, because a lot of this fungus is overwintering right there in old leaf litter at the base of the plant, not just floating around in the air. One more thing that helps a lot here, once in mid to late August, go through and thin out any weak, overcrowded stems, just cut them right out. This opens the plant up so air can actually move through it, and mildew struggles a lot more in a plant that isn't sitting in its own stagnant, humid little pocket. Here's a scenario that used to genuinely upset me. You do everything right all season, and then you walk out one morning after a storm and your beautiful, full phlox clump is just flopped over, split right down the middle, like something sat on it. It's not a disease, it's not a pest. Phlox stems are hollow inside, and by late summer they're carrying a lot of weight up top with all those flower heads. One heavy rain that soaks the blooms, or one strong gust of wind, and that's enough to snap a stem that size right at the base. So once my phlox clumps get to around knee height, I put in 3 or 4 thin stakes around the outside of the clump and tie them loosely with something soft. And I mean loosely, never tight twine that digs in. You want the stems to still have a little room to sway in the wind, because a stem that's rigidly locked in place actually snaps easier than one that can flex a bit. And here's a nice side benefit. A staked, gathered clump also has better airflow running through the middle of it, which circles right back to that mildew problem we just talked about. So this one habit is doing double duty. Now, this next part is something almost nobody talks about, and I think that's exactly why it catches people off guard. Most gardeners see any kind of damaged leaf in August and immediately assume it's mildew. But there are two pests that show up around this exact time that get missed constantly. The first is spider mites. They love it hot, dry, and dusty, which is basically what late summer looks like in a lot of gardens. You'll notice tiny pale speckling across the leaves, almost like the leaf has been lightly stippled with a pin, and if you flip the leaf over, you might see faint webbing underneath. The second is the phlox plant bug. This one causes a similar yellow-white stippling, but you'll also notice the leaf edges curling downward, and buds that just never quite open right. They look stunted or distorted. Here's what I do. I make it a habit to actually flip leaves over and check the undersides regularly, not just glance at the tops. If I spot either of these, I treat with insecticidal soap or neem oil in the evening, and I always plan to repeat that treatment about a week to 10 days later, because both of these pests reproduce fast, and one treatment usually isn't enough to fully knock them back. Catching this early is honestly the difference between a small, easily treatable problem and a plant that just quietly stops blooming well, and you never figure out why. This next one takes almost no effort, but it makes a bigger visual difference than you'd expect. In the evening, when I'm walking through the garden anyway, I'll stop at my phlox and just lightly run my fingers through the blooms, pulling off any individual petals or small florets that have gone brown and dried up, mixed in with the fresh ones. Not whole stems, just the dead bits. Here's why it matters. Those dying petals left sitting there become a magnet for grey mold, especially after rain. And pulling them off means the plant isn't wasting any energy holding onto dead tissue, it's putting everything into the fresh buds instead. It takes maybe 2 minutes, and the whole bed instantly looks fuller and fresher. Alright, I saved the best one for last, because this is the one that actually delivers on everything I promised you at the start of this video. As autumn gets closer, start actually watching the nighttime forecast, not just glancing at it. Once you see temperatures dropping toward 2 or 3 degrees Celsius overnight, that's your cue. On those nights, cover your phlox loosely with a lightweight garden fabric draped over the top, not pulled tight or tucked in hard. Then in the morning, once the sun's up and it's warmed back up, take the covering right back off, so the plant doesn't sit there trapped and damp all day. This one small habit, watching the forecast and covering on those cold nights, can genuinely be the difference between your blooms wrapping up in September and your phlox still going strong into October, weeks after everyone else's garden has gone completely bare. Let's run through everything fast, so you've got it all in one place. Deadhead every few days, cutting just above a healthy leaf, not the whole stem. Stop the nitrogen and switch to something with more phosphorus and potassium instead. Water at the base in the morning, never overhead in the evening. Add mulch to keep moisture steady. Watch for that white mildew film and treat it early, and thin out crowded stems for better airflow. Stake your clumps loosely once they get tall. Flip the leaves and check for spider mites and phlox plant bugs. Pull off spent petals by hand every so often, and once frost threatens, cover on the cold nights and uncover in the morning. If you put even half of this into practice, I promise you're going to notice the difference. While your neighbors' gardens are already fading into that quiet, bare, end of summer look, yours is going to still be full of color, still pulling in the last of the pollinators, still looking like it's the middle of summer. That's genuinely one of my favorite feelings in the garden, walking out in October to a yard that's still blooming when everyone else has packed it in for the year. If this video helped you out, go ahead and subscribe. I've got a lot more of this kind of practical, hands-on stuff coming. And before you go, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, or which phlox variety you're growing this year. I genuinely love reading through those. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.